Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My presentation will be focusing on the case of Latifah binti Masin versus Rosmawati binti Sharibun and another. Basically, this case highlights the non-interference of civil courts in matters that supposedly fall under the jurisdiction of Sharia court. The dispute that arose in this case was about the money in joint bank account after the death of a Muslim, whether it formed as part of the deceased estate or the hibah to the appellant. Throughout this presentation, I will be explaining about the facts of the case, the federal court's decision, and the legal discussion that arise from this case. The objectives of my presentation is to explain the main legal issue and ruling of the case. The second one is to highlight the division of jurisdiction between the civil court and the Sharia court in cases involving hibah. Moving on to the facts of the case. Dato Sharibun, the deceased, married to three women during his lifetime. The appellant is his third wife, while the respondents are his daughters with the second wife. So, following his death, the daughters of the second wife filed a petition in High Court for the administration of his estate, including monies in joint bank account. So dispute arose over the money in joint bank account between the appellant and the deceased in Bumiputra Commerce Bank and Standard Chartered Bank. The appellant argued that all money in these banks are belong to her, as it was given by the deceased to her as hibah. While the other beneficiaries argue that the money in joint bank account was part of the deceased estate. So, in this appeal, both parties, both appellant and respondents, agreed that the main issue was whether the money in joint bank account had been validly given to the appellant as hibah under Islamic law. Previously, the High Court judge had decided that Islamic law applied to this case. Therefore, the estate shall be distributed among the beneficiaries according to Faraid. The court also ruled that no valid hibah had taken place and the money belonged to the estate. However, in Court of Appeal, this decision were declared as null and void, as hibah was supposedly fall under the jurisdiction of Sharia court. Therefore, by virtue of Article 1211A of Federal Constitution, the civil court shall not decide and hear this case. Now I continue to the federal court's decision. In federal court, the appeal was dismissed on the ground that since both parties agreed that the issue involved with Islamic law of hibah, which exclusively fall under the jurisdiction of Sharia court, therefore the Court of Appeal was right in declaring the decision of High Court as null and void. And the judge further contended that only Sharia court have the responsibility in deciding whether the hibah is valid and who is entitled to the property. Moving on to the last part of this presentation, which is the legal discussion that arises from this case. The first discussion is what is the purpose of Article 1211A of the Federal Constitution. In this case, Federal Court ascertained the position of Sharia Court after the addition of Clause 1A in Article 121 of the Federal Constitution. So supposedly, after this amendment, civil courts are barred from interfering in any cases that exclusively fall under the jurisdiction of Sharia court. So by referring to this case, since from the beginning it was clear that the issue is about hibah, so on the first hand, the High Court shouldn't hear or even decide on this case. The second discussion is about the constitutional conflict. In this case, the federal court judge has ruled which court have the jurisdiction on deciding jurisdictional conflict. So when jurisdiction of High Court and Sharia Court is challenged on constitutional ground, only federal court have the jurisdiction to make decision on it. In conclusion, this case has strengthened the position of Sharia High Court after the amendment of Article 1211A of the Federal Constitution. It also clarifies the jurisdictional boundaries between the civil court and Sharia courts in Malaysia. Each court has its own exclusive jurisdiction listed in the federal constitution. Therefore, there shouldn't be any interference made by either Sharia courts or civil courts. So that's all for my presentation. Thank you.